My daughter blocked me after the divorce and didn't want to hear my side. Now, 8 years later, she reached out to discuss my inheritance. I, 54, got divorced from my wife, 48, 8 years ago. My daughter, 28, stopped talking to me and sided with her mother without ever asking how I felt. My divorce happened almost 10 years ago, and it has taken me a long time to come to terms with how everything unfolded and find peace in my life. This happened partly because my ex-wife tried to ruin my reputation, but mostly because I loved my daughter. Being completely cut off from her life was the hardest thing I've ever faced. Since she was an adult, I couldn't be part of her life unless she chose to have me there, and it was clear she had made her choice to stay with her mother. I don't have any family except for my mom, who has Alzheimer's. This situation has been one of the hardest experiences of my life. After the divorce, I reached out to my daughter multiple times, but she was completely focused on her mom's perspective and didn't want to listen to my side at all. My ex contacted me and threatened to sue for harassment if I didn't stop seeing my daughter. That made things clear for me. I stopped reaching out to her. I spent 8 years caring for my mom and working on my career. I've had some casual relationships, but I struggle to trust anyone after my divorce. That has been my life for almost 10 years. I apologize if I come across as negative. I'm writing this because my daughter got in touch with me after a long time. I felt really happy and thought she finally realized that the divorce wasn't solely my fault. It was comforting, especially since my mother recently passed away. I've been handling that grief alone and was looking for some comfort and family connection. My daughter contacted me a few months after my mother died. I received a call from an unfamiliar number. When I answered, a woman's voice greeted me on the line. I didn't realize it was my daughter. I didn't even recognize her voice since it had been so long since we last talked. I was really surprised when she introduced herself. She mentioned seeing on Facebook that her grandma had passed away and wanted to see how I was doing. I was surprised. I didn't realize she was following my online activity, and I thought it was nice of her. I appreciated her call and mentioned that I was okay. I also told her that I missed her. We chatted for a while, and she mentioned that she'd like to meet up in person to catch up instead of just talking on the phone. I felt really happy and said yes right away. We decided to get together at my place this weekend. I was really excited to meet her after all these years, so I wanted to share my excitement with anyone reading this. I want to rebuild our relationship, or at least get to know each other better. My daughter visited for dinner since I wanted to cook for her. I felt both nervous and excited. When I opened the door, I didn't recognize her at all. It had been almost 10 years since I last saw her, and she was just a little girl back then. We began chatting, and while it felt a bit awkward initially, I believe we both relaxed and shared more as time went on. She shared her life and work with me, and I shared mine in return. After dinner, we finally addressed the issue that everyone was avoiding. I asked her why she never listened to my side during the divorce and just went with her mom's opinion. I acknowledged that her mother was more involved since she was a stay-at-home mom while I worked long hours in construction. Still, I always made an effort to spend as much time as I could with my daughter. My daughter said she regrets how things turned out. She felt too young to think things through and got influenced by how her mom presented everything. My ex-wife portrayed me as the worst person, someone who only cared about himself. She never listened to my side of the story and just accepted everything her mom said. We continued our conversation, and everything seemed fine until she finally shared the reason for her presence. We had been talking for hours when I asked her what made her contact me after all these years. She seemed a bit uneasy, so I told her she could be straightforward with me. She mentioned that she had been watching my updates on Facebook. When her grandmother passed away, she expected lawyers to get in touch regarding her inheritance. When that didn't happen, she decided to contact me directly. She mentioned needing time and space for me to grieve, but she just got engaged and could really use some money for the wedding expenses. It honestly felt like a punch to the gut. I believed my prayers were finally answered after all these years and I could have a family again. But it turns out she never cared about me at all. This was just a way for her to secure her inheritance. The funny part is that it's not even her inheritance, Legally, it's all mine. If she weren't such a bad daughter, she would get most, if not all of it. Money has never mattered to me, to be honest. I own my own house, don't spend much on hobbies, and usually get my clothes from Target. Even if the inheritance wasn't an issue from the start, I would have been happy to help with her wedding if she had approached me kindly instead of trying to exploit me and focusing only on the inheritance. I had all of this on my mind at once. I kept my cool and asked her if that was everything she wanted. She became defensive and stated that the inheritance was not her priority. Her main goal was to connect with me, and she would regret not reaching out while her grandmother was still alive. She mentioned that she had wanted to contact me for years, but never found the courage. She believed I would never forgive her for kicking me out without an explanation, and that her mom had manipulated her. Her panicked expression showed she was trying to fix things so I would forgive her. I started to wonder if she was only after the money. I asked her how she found out about the inheritance. She told me that a few years before the divorce, she visited my late mother. During that visit, my mother mentioned that she wanted her to inherit everything from my father, who had passed away years earlier, since she was the only grandchild in the family. I don't have siblings, and my marriage was fine at that time, so I get why my mom might have said that to my daughter. If the divorce hadn't happened, or my daughter hadn't left me for years after, the money would have been hers, as I said before. The idea that she only cared about the money and was giving me false hope was really hard to take. I felt crushed, but tried hard to hide it from her. In that moment, I realized the only way to gauge my daughter's true intentions was to tell her there was no inheritance money. I asked her what she thought the inheritance would be, and she gave a pretty good estimate. It was clear that a lot of thought was put into this. I told her I was sorry to disappoint her, but her grandmother left everything to me years ago. I planned to use that money to start a business, so I couldn't help her out. I offered to contribute a few $1,000s for her wedding expenses. Her expression showed my biggest worries were true. She mentioned that she valued my offer, but as the only grandchild, she feels entitled to a portion of the inheritance since it's her grandma's money being discussed. I told her I wished I could help, but my decision was final. There was nothing more I could do if she wasn't satisfied with the money I was offering. Her face turned bright red, and she began to show clear signs of anger. She asked me once more to rethink my choice, but I made it clear that I was going to stay with what felt right for me. That's when she revealed her true colors and said something that confirmed all my doubts about her intentions. She said she should have realized I'd always be the selfish jerk her mom warned her about, and she's happy I'm alone now. I stared at her, trying to hide my disgust. Her words stung, but by then, I was prepared for it. I didn't see her being that honest so quickly. That's all. I interrupted her before she could continue. I realized she was just like her mother, always reaching out only when she needed something. I told her that trying to manipulate me by using my grief for my mother was disgusting, even for someone like her. She attempted to speak, but I just laughed and told her that if she hadn't blocked me all those years ago, she would have received my messages about her grandmother and likely would have gotten most, if not all, of the inheritance. The sentence did what I intended. She seemed completely confused and asked me to clarify. I asked her to unblock me on her old number so I could resend all the texts that never went through. She did. I sent her all the messages where I pleaded for her to listen to me. I also mentioned that her grandmother had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and that I wanted them to meet before she completely forgot about her only grandchild. This was completely true. At the start of her illness, my mom frequently talked about my daughter and wanted to see her. It hurt me deeply that I couldn't make that wish come true. This ungrateful, cruel child actually had the nerve to ask for inheritance. I have to give my daughter some credit. She seemed ashamed after reading all those messages. She said sorry, but pointed out that her grandma would want her to get her part of the inheritance. She thinks it's not right for me to hold that against her. She mentioned that she was young and unaware during the divorce. Otherwise, she would have managed things differently. She said she really wants to fix our relationship, and if I act selfishly now, she won't feel good about continuing it. I told her that if money is what matters most to her, then maybe it's best if we don't pursue a relationship. I wanted to trust her when she talked about fixing our relationship. I really wanted to, but I just couldn't at that moment. I said I might think about giving our relationship another shot, but the inheritance was not happening. She glared at me with intense anger and walked out of my house. I didn't make any effort to stop her. I've talked to some friends since then. Many of them think I made the right choice. One of my friends suggested that since I don't care much about the money, I should just let my daughter have some of it if it means keeping family around. I don't agree with this, but ever since he mentioned it, I can't stop thinking about it. Should I share my inheritance with my daughter? Update 1. Hello, this post received more replies than I expected. I appreciate your advice and opinions. They provided the perspective I needed. I'll begin by addressing the most frequent question: what happened during my divorce? I haven't talked about it in years, but I think it's time to share. My wife and I have been married for 23 years. After all those years, I never expected her to stab me in the back, but she did. I don't want to go into specifics, but I discovered that she was unfaithful with several guys. It turns out this had been happening for years before I discovered it. When I found out, I was totally crushed. I was unsure how to face her, so I turned to drinking a lot and being with different people. I almost ruined everything. I had many arguments with her, and I suspected that her drinking helped her manipulate my daughter into supporting her. After almost a year apart, we finally faced each other and got divorced. My ex-wife was a journalist back then and had some local fame. She tried to ruin my reputation using her influence and almost succeeded. After the divorce, I struggled for a long time to stop drinking and return to my normal life. My daughter completely abandoning me was really tough. I have to say, when I discovered my ex was cheating, I lost my way and wasn't really there for my daughter. Even during the separation and for about a year after the divorce, I mostly kept to myself and wasn't present for my daughter. After I quit drinking and got my life in order, I reached out to her and said I was sorry. She wouldn't listen and blocked me on all platforms. I believed that if I gave her time, things would improve. Now, after 8 years, our relationship has only deteriorated. Now the other important question about my mom's inheritance. Actually, the money was my father's. My grandparents were doctors and acquired property all over the city during their careers. Most of it was leased out and generated a significant amount of income. My dad died when I was 21 and left everything to my mom. Everything stayed in her name during my marriage and for a few years after my divorce, while her health was still good. When my mom died, I inherited everything as her only heir. My wife got nothing in the divorce except alimony until she remarried a few years later, since my mom owned everything back then. As it is, my daughter has never really owned anything. She knew her grandma was a landlady and owned a few Airbnbs, but I never touched that money. The income from my old construction business was more than enough for a comfortable life. I hope I answered all your questions. My daughter hasn't contacted me since that night, and I doubt she will, honestly. It seems she was only putting on a front for the inheritance. Now that it's off the table, I doubt she'll stick around. I'm not going to pretend I'm not upset about it, but I've learned not to expect too much from people, regardless of their identity. Well, that's it, I suppose. I appreciate everyone for the support. Thanks for that. I think it's time for me to put myself out there and get back into dating. I need to find companionship instead of waiting for people from my past to return. Update 2. It's been a busy week. I believe that would be my final update, but it seems life had different ideas. So here's what happened. I had just gotten back from work and was thinking about going out when the doorbell rang. I didn't think anyone would be there, but when I opened the door, there she was. My biggest fear. She changed her hair and lost some weight, so it took me a moment to recognize her. Still, it's tough to forget someone you were with for decades. Seeing her was really surprising. I was at a loss for words, so I just stood there feeling uncomfortable. She asked if I could spare a moment to discuss a few things. I was unsure, but I didn't want her waiting at my door, so I let her in. It was really awkward, as you can probably imagine. We chatted about various topics, and then she mentioned that she knew this was a bit unusual, but there were some things she needed to share with me. I asked her to continue, and she mentioned that our daughter had contacted her about the inheritance. I had a feeling that would happen. Why would she want to talk to me after all this time? She mentioned that she realized the divorce was tough for me and admitted she went further than she probably should have. I scoffed at that, but she didn't seem to notice. She said I shouldn't punish my daughter for what happened between us. She mentioned things my daughter has said, like being very young during the divorce, and how I shouldn't feel resentful about her choosing her mother over me. I told her that I don't hold any resentment anymore. Even if I had anger, it wouldn't be directed at our daughter. I told her I was hurt to realize that after all those years, she only wanted to reach out to her father because she thought she might get some money. I told her what I told my daughter. If she had bothered to reach out sooner, she would have received the inheritance. My ex attempted to defend herself, but I made it clear that my decision was final. If we were just going to keep going in circles about this, we were wasting everyone's time. I told her I had plans, and if there was nothing more to talk about, she should probably go. She nodded and said sorry for bothering me. I told her it was fine, and then she left. I sat there in disbelief after she left. I didn't think I would see her again, much less talk to her in my house. It was odd and reminded me of old memories I'd prefer to forget. I went out with friends to take my mind off things. So here it is. I had to share this because it was weighing on me. Appreciate you sticking around if you're still with me. Update 3. Here's another update for everyone. This afternoon, I was at work when I received a call about my daughter. I considered ignoring it, but my curiosity won, so I answered the call. I answered her right away, saying that if this was about the inheritance, then I didn't see any reason for us to talk. She mentioned there was another topic she wanted to discuss. I asked her to continue, and she said she had been reflecting on what happened and felt she owed me an apology. She acknowledged that she should have acted differently. If I was open to forgiving her and giving our relationship another shot, she would be glad to have me at her wedding. I was quite surprised, to put it mildly. I asked her if she was certain, and she replied yes. She said I could take my time to think it over and let her know if I would be there. I agreed, and we ended the call. I'm feeling really confused right now. A part of me is happy about being at her wedding, but I can't shake the feeling that this is just a way for her to win me over and eventually get the inheritance. If she's being sincere, I don't want to ruin my opportunity to be part of her life. If I decline and she doesn't contact me again, I can't really hold it against her. I would like some advice if anyone can help me. Update 4. I will be attending the wedding. A lot of you mentioned that attending the wedding wouldn't hurt. That seems reasonable. I don't have to do anything in return for getting invited to the wedding. No, I'm not part of the wedding party. I would only be a visitor. I get it. It's a big jump to go from not talking for 8 years to having someone walk her down the aisle. I'm not sure either of us would feel okay with that. I hope this is the beginning of something new and that we can create something meaningful together. Thank you all for your support and the advice you've shared. Thanks, and I hope for your good luck.